Thanks again for tuning into Moonshine Gaming. Today we're going to be doing the top 10 rarest and most expensive Sega Genesis games. I also realize I'm wearing all Nintendos, so that I'm not really matching for this video at all, but disregard that. So as per usual, we're going to be following a few parameters for this top 10 list. First off, the games are going to be NTSC, so released in North America. Secondly, the list is going to be based off current market value prices for complete in-box listings. So what this means is the box, instruction manual, inserts, and cartridge are going to be included in the price. There's a couple exclusions that we're not going to be including, such as variants, homebrews, and collector's editions. There are a few homebrews that are starting to raise in price and they won't be included on this list. And the Blockbuster World Championship cart obviously is the most expensive Genesis game, but that also won't be included. We're only going to be including games that you can purchase in store as an actual buyer. So let's get into it. First up, we've got Mega Turrican. So this is a side-scrolling platformer that came out in 1994, just 1 year after Super Turrican on the Super Nintendo was released. With them releasing so close to one another, it's almost inevitable that the two will be compared to each other. The graphics are on par with the Super Nintendo version, but they're slightly less colorful. The special effects also aren't as good as Super Turrican either. One thing to be noted in the Genesis version is the incredibly goofy animated intro, which is hilarious and awesome. Other than Gunstar Heroes, this is by far the most action-packed side-scrolling shooter on the Genesis, with great backgrounds and enemy design. Although I prefer Super Turrican over Mega Turrican, this is still a must-own for a fan of this genre, the side-scrolling shooters. Complete in box, this one's worth $270. Next up, we've got Skeleton Crew. So this is an action game that was released in 1995 and features an isometric view, which is similar to Diablo if you've ever played that game. The game was released fairly late in the Genesis's life cycle, so it's no surprise that the graphics are really good. They seem to be pushing the Genesis hardware right to the limit with this game. The game seems to follow a heavy metal art style and theme, so I was really surprised to hear the music in the game was actually more sounding like generic rock, which didn't really seem to match the art style or theme that they were going with. Unfortunately, the gameplay doesn't stand up with the great graphics, and it feels like something's missing. It almost seems like the game was released unfinished, which is actually quite possible because in magazines at the time, there were previews for this game that were advertising that you could ride vehicles like jet skis and tanks, but these were nowhere to be seen in the finished game, so maybe they pushed it out early, I'm not sure. This game is currently worth $274. Next up, we've got Splatterhouse 2. This is a horror action game that came out in 1992. And although this was a sequel to Splatterhouse for the NES, it didn't really innovate or change anything as far as gameplay goes. It seemed to take the exact same formula and gameplay that was on the original Splatterhouse and replicated it and just kind of amped up the graphics. I don't know what else to say. Everything is the exact same in this game pretty much as the original. The attacks are identical. Everything is almost the same. I'd also like to note that you can't backtrack in these games, so once the level screen progresses forward, there's no way to go back in the level, which was kind of frustrating to me, but I guess that's just the way that Splatterhouse games are, so. At the time, the game was incredibly violent and had over-the-top disturbing imagery and graphics. Kind of caused a stir with the video game haters. If you're a horror fan or a Splatterhouse fan, this game definitely deserves a spot on your shelf. But otherwise, I would pass. This game's worth $281. Next up, we've got El Viento. So this game, for the most part, feels like a mix between Castlevania and Metroid. As a lot of the game, there's a series of maze-like labyrinth-style levels, although not all the time. There's one point in the game when you have to ride a fast-moving dolphin as a surfboard, so that kind of breaks the cycle of the maze-like labyrinth-style levels, but for the most part, Castlevania and Metroid mixed. The graphics and music aren't that impressive, but the diverse level design and boss battles for sure make this game worth checking out at least. I've heard this game has a bit of a cult following as well, and I can definitely see why. So this game is worth $291. Next up, we've got Phantasy Star IV. This is an incredible JRPG which was released in 1993 with a sci-fi aesthetic, and it's the first of 2 RPGs on this list. The gameplay is pretty straightforward. You run around from town to town fighting monsters in random battles using turn-based combat. It's simple but not dull. You can also fly a spaceship to multiple planets, which gives an epic feel to this JRPG, and it's awesome. Surprisingly, there are also some fairly complex combat systems that you can set up as well. You're able to actually pre-set up actions for your party on specific turns. So for example, you can have all your party members set to automatically attack on the first turn and heal on the second turn. You can basically set up the whole battle before you even fight, which is cool. What I found about most JRPGs is that they can seem slow and tedious at times, but Phantasy Star IV never feels slow. You're constantly moving from dungeon to dungeon, boss to boss, and it never gets boring. This game is a must own, or at least a must play for any JRPG fan. This game's worth $294. If you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Moonshine Gaming. Next up, we've got Troubleshooter. This is a side-scrolling shooter that was released in 1992. And this game is unique right off the bat for the fact that the 2 characters that you control are both females. And other than Metroid, I can't really think of any other games from the early 90s with female protagonists, so that's cool right off the bat. The game mechanics are interesting as well. You control Madison, who is always the rightmost character on the screen, and Crystal, the second character, will follow behind you and closely mimic your gunfire and movement. The game kind of reminded me of Contra when I discovered that it consisted of 6 action-packed vertical and horizontal stages. It's got great music, great level design, and there's a ton of charm packed into this game. There's only one downside to this game. Sometimes it feels that the levels are a little bit short, but other than that, this is a really good game. This one's worth $309. Next up, we've got The Punisher. This is a side-scrolling beat-em-up released in 1995. In the 90s, it was always tough when arcade games were ported to at-home consoles, because it was very rare that the at-home versions lived up to the hype of the arcade versions. Unfortunately, The Punisher fell under the category of underwhelming arcade ports. It had downgraded graphics, simplified backgrounds, darker and less vivid colors, smaller sprites, redesigned enemies. I could go on and on. Most of the player attacks made their way over into the Genesis version, which is the one upside is there was a ton of different attacks. But unfortunately, the controls and gameplay still feel really slow and sluggish. There are a ton of better beat-em-ups on the console for much cheaper than The Punisher. I'd pass on this one. This one's worth $361. Here we go, getting into the top 3. Next up, we've got Zero, the Kamikaze Squirrel. And let me start by saying this might be one of my favorite video game names of all time. This was a platformer that was released in 1994. I'm a huge fan of Aero the Acrobat, so I was really excited to dive into this game because it technically is a spin-off or sequel to the Aero games. Also, Zero does appear a couple times in the Aero the Acrobat games, piloting some machines and showing up at the end of the game. If Aero was a kid's game, then Zero is definitely a more mature and edgy spin-off with a much darker tone and surprisingly violent gameplay. The combination of this and the colorful cartoon stylings are awesome and right up my alley. I love this. Zero also has a broader range of moves and attacks compared to Aero, and the level design is more focused on platforming mechanics and less about exploration. One thing that made me sad about this game is that during the credits, they hint or almost promise a sequel, and this never happened. Maybe one day Sunsoft will open up the vault and give us the sequel that we're waiting for. This one's worth $387. Next up, we've got Musha. This is a shoot 'em up that was released in 1991. And for how early in the Genesis's life cycle that this was released, I was pleasantly surprised by the incredible colors, highly detailed graphics, and amazing music. This is a very difficult game, but it is fair. If you're looking for a relaxing shooter, look somewhere else, because this isn't it. The controls are fluid for the most part, but the button mapping has your main weapon as one button and your sub-weapon as another. So to unleash really powerful attacks, you actually have to press both buttons at the same time. It seems kind of annoying, but once you get used to it, it's not too bad. If you're a shoot 'em up fan and up for a challenge, this is debatably the best shmup on the Genesis and maybe even of the 4th generation as a whole. This one's worth $1,267. Here we go, number 1. Here we go! Crusader of Centy. This is a top-down RPG which was released in 1995. At first this seems like a Zelda clone for the Genesis, but as you progress through the game, you realize that this is far from a clone. In the game, you control a 14-year-old boy named Corona. You're given a sword by your father, and you're on your way to explore and fight enemies. The further you get into the game, you actually became unable to speak to humans, and you can only speak to the animals. Eventually, you have 2 animals accompany you as allies, which you can rotate in and out depending on who you want to be with you, and they have special abilities such as being able to run faster, or turning into a platform and giving you access to a normally inaccessible area. Kind of reminds me of the allies in Paper Mario if you've ever played that. Although the game has a slow start with lots of grinding and collecting money, once you get past the stale beginning section of the game, you'll dive into some really incredible gameplay and unexpected level changes. This game's really well put together once you get past the beginning boring part. The game has an incredible soundtrack as well, with happy and upbeat tunes with really catchy melodies. The amazing gameplay makes this game a must-play for RPG fans. But with the current market price, emulation might be the way that you have to go if you want to try this game. The complete in-box price is $1,998. Wow. And that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed the top 10 rarest and most expensive Sega Genesis games. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to Moonshine Gaming for lots of awesome video game content. See you next time. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, you might like these.